The laughter hit first. Sharp, careless, the kind that comes easy when you've never been on the wrong end of it. Glasses clinked, silverware scraped porcelain, a restaurant full of people who had never once wondered who scrubbed the floor beneath their feet. Then, silence. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that falls when something walks into a room that changes the math of who gets to breathe. One voice, low, unhurried, the kind of calm that makes armed men reach for what's closest. I want everyone in this room to think very carefully before they answer my next question. A manager's hands trembled against his thighs. A waitress pressed herself into the wall. A patron set down his fork like it might detonate. Who was laughing? 14 hours earlier. 5:04 a.m. A pair of shoes, cracked leather, worn soft at the sole, stepped off a city bus into darkness. They moved through empty streets the way water moves through stone, patient, invisible, certain of the path. Past shuttered storefronts, past sleeping windows, down an alley to a service entrance no customer had ever noticed. A key turned. Fluorescent lights stuttered awake. Zinda tied her apron the way she had tied it every morning for 11 years. Same knot, same hands, same silence. She filled her bucket. She dropped to her knees, and she began to clean a floor that would, by tonight, be stained with her own blood. No one saw her arrive. No one ever did. But someone was coming who remembered every single thing the world had chosen to forget about her. Before this story satisfies every bit of anger you're about to feel, drop a like right now, not later, now, because the algorithm decides whether stories like this reach people who need to hear them, and you pressing that button is the difference between 1 million people seeing this and nobody seeing it at all. Subscribe if you're new, hit the bell, and leave a comment telling me what city are you watching from tonight. I want to know exactly who's in this room with me. Now, let's go back 14 hours. She started with the bathrooms. She always started with the bathrooms because no one else would, and because the things people leave behind in bathrooms tell you exactly who they are when they think no one's counting. Zinda moved through the dark restaurant the way a church organist moves through hymns, by feel, by memory, by the bones in her hands knowing where to go before her mind gave permission. 11 years, same route, same order. Bathrooms, then the bar top, then the dining floor, west to east, because the sunrise would catch the streaks if she went the other direction. Then the windows, then the brass along the host stand, polished until her own face floated in it like a ghost she recognized but couldn't quite name. She didn't play music while she worked. She used to. Years ago she'd hum, old gospel, the kind her mother sang while hanging laundry, songs that made hard things feel chosen instead of endured. She stopped the day Johnson told her the humming was distracting the atmosphere. The restaurant was empty at the time. There was no atmosphere. But Zinda put the music away, folded it up inside herself like a letter she'd finish reading later, and she cleaned in silence from that day forward. By 6:15 the dining room gleamed, every chair pushed in at the same angle, every salt shaker full, every napkin folded into the same tight crease. Zinda stood at the far end and looked back at her work the way a painter looks at a canvas, not with pride exactly, but with the quiet satisfaction of a thing done right by someone who would receive no credit for doing it. The kitchen door swung open, and the smell of garlic hit the air before Teresa did. "Girl, I know you didn't start without saying good morning to me." Zinda's face changed, not dramatically, she wasn't dramatic about anything, but the muscles around her eyes softened in a way they only did for this one person in this one building. "Mornin' tea." Teresa was already pouring 2 cups of coffee from the pot she started the moment she walked in, not the espresso the restaurant served customers at $9 a cup, regular coffee, gas station strength, the kind that meant, "I see you and you matter enough to be poured for." They sat on overturned crates near the service entrance, shoulders almost touching, steam rising between them. Teresa talked about her grandson's basketball game, about the rent going up again, about a dream she had where she won a cruise but the ship only went in circles. Zinda listened. She laughed once, softly, and the sound was so rare it startled even her. For 11 minutes, Zinda was a person. Then the front door slammed open, and the minutes were over. Johnson walked in the way Johnson always walked in, like the building had been waiting for him and was wasting his time by not already being perfect. He didn't say good morning. He hadn't said good morning to Zinda in 6 years. He stopped saying it the same year he stopped using her name in front of customers. "You!" He pointed without looking at her. "There's a scuff by table 9. Handle it." There was no scuff by table 9. Zinda had checked every inch of that floor on her hands and knees 30 minutes ago. But she set down her coffee, she stood up, she picked up her rag. Teresa watched her go with the expression of a woman who has swallowed the same scream so many times she's forgotten it's still in her throat. Zinda knelt by table 9 and polished a floor that was already clean, because in this building, obedience and invisibility were the same thing, and she had mastered them both so completely that sometimes, late at night on that bus ride home, she wondered if she'd made herself disappear so well that even God had lost sight of her.
The staff meeting happened at 9 a.m. sharp, which meant it happened whenever Johnson decided 9 a.m. was. Today, it was 9:22. Everyone stood. No one sat in Johnson's presence unless Johnson was also sitting, and Johnson liked to stand, because standing let him pace, and pacing let him point, and pointing let him feel like the kind of man whose finger meant something. "Tonight," he said, tugging his cuffs the way men do when they've seen powerful people tug their cuffs on television, "is the most important evening in the history of this restaurant. A VIP. The kind of VIP where I'm not even going to say the name out loud because half of you would faint and the other half would do something stupid." He scanned the room. "If anything goes wrong, anything, you're all finished. Not reassigned, not written up, finished." Marie straightened her collar. Sandra adjusted her earpiece. The busboys went still. Everyone recalibrated. And like water finding the lowest point in a landscape, the pressure began to flow downhill, toward the person at the bottom. Johnson turned to Zinda the way a man turns toward a wall he's decided to punch. "I want every surface in this building disinfected twice. Floors, baseboards, window tracks. I don't care if you have to use a toothbrush. And I want it done before 5. Not at 5, before 5. He looked at her cleaning cart, parked neatly beside the service hallway. "And get that thing out of sight. This isn't a janitor's closet." Before Zinda could move the cart herself, Sandra was already there, gripping the handle with 2 fingers like she was picking up something dead from the road. She wheeled it through the kitchen doors and left it next to the dumpster staging area. When she came back, she wiped her hands on a cloth napkin and dropped the napkin in the trash. Marie watched, smiled. Not a big smile, the small, efficient kind. The kind that says, "I'm not the one doing it, but I want you to know I'm enjoying that it's being done." A new girl stood near the bread station with her hands clasped tight enough to crack her own knuckles. Belinda, 23, 2 weeks on the job.
hired to help Zinda with the increased workload, though no one had used the word help. They'd said additional sanitation support, which meant the same thing but cost less dignity to say out loud. Belinda's eyes were wide and wet. She looked at Zinda the way people look at car accidents, wanting to help, terrified of getting close. Zinda passed her on the way to retrieve her cart from beside the garbage. She didn't stop walking, didn't look at her directly, but her voice landed like a hand on the girl's shoulder, steady, low, meant only for her. Don't react, that's what they want. Belinda opened her mouth to respond, but Zinda was already through the kitchen doors, already kneeling beside her cart, already wringing out her rag and water she'd have to change twice before lunch. And in the corner booth, the one with the emerald cushions and the view of the entire dining floor, Glory Matzinger sat with a sparkling water and a phone she wasn't looking at, the owner's wife. The woman's signature was on every paycheck in the building, including Zinda's. She had watched Sandra wheel the cart away. She had seen Marie's smile. She had heard every word Johnson said. Glory took a slow sip of her water, crossed her ankles beneath the table, and turned her gaze to the window, where it was easier to look at the city outside than at the quiet violence she was funding from the inside. Somewhere in the kitchen, on her knees beside a dumpster door, Zinda wrung her rag and said nothing. She had learned a long time ago that buildings like this didn't run on electricity or gas. They ran on the agreement, silent, unanimous, renewed every single day, that someone in the building didn't count. Today, like every day, Zinda was that someone. But tonight was going to be different. She just didn't know it yet.
Nicholas Ashford arrived at 12:47 like a storm that smelled like bourbon and cologne that cost more than Zinda's rent. He didn't walk into restaurants, he occupied them. Loud voice, louder watch, the kind of man who tipped well enough to buy the right to treat people however he wanted. He sat at his usual table, center of the dining room, because Nicholas didn't do corners, and ordered his second drink before finishing his first. By 1 o'clock, his voice carried to every wall in the building. By 1:15, even Marie's trained smile was starting to ache. Zinda was polishing the brass rail near the bar when she heard it. "Hey, cleaning lady." She didn't look up immediately, not because she didn't hear, but because she'd learned that sometimes if you stayed still long enough, you became invisible again, and the moment passed over you like weather. I said, "Hey," louder now, a finger snapping twice, the sound a man makes when he's calling something that isn't a person. "There's something on the floor near my table. Come deal with it." Zinda set down her cloth. She walked over. She looked at the floor near his chair. There was nothing there. She knew it. He knew it. Everyone in the room knew it. She knelt anyway. And that's when Nicholas lifted his glass of red wine, a 2016 Barolo, $85 a pour, tilted his wrist, and let it fall. It didn't splash. It detonated. Wine hit Zinda's face, her neck, the front of her uniform. The glass struck the marble and shattered into a constellation of razor-edged pieces. Red spread across white stone like something that had been alive and suddenly wasn't. Marie gasped. The gasp hung in the air for exactly 1 second before it curled at the edges and became a laugh. She covered her mouth, not out of shame, but to hold the shape of it, to keep it small enough to deny later. Sandra didn't laugh. Sandra smirked, which was worse. A laugh is a reflex, but a smirk is a decision. Johnson materialized beside the table in 3 seconds flat. Not beside Zinda, beside Nicholas. "Mr. Ashford, I am so sorry about this. We'll have a fresh glass brought immediately. On the house, absolutely." He turned to Zinda. wine dripping from her chin onto her collar, a piece of broken glass sitting in her open palm like a jewel she hadn't asked for, its edge nestled into the soft meat below her thumb, blood, dark, quiet, hers beginning to pool. "You shouldn't have been standing so close," Johnson said, not whispering, saying it at full volume, for the room, so the room would know whose side the building was on. Belinda came running from the kitchen with a fistful of napkins and dropped to her knees beside Zinda. "Here, your hand. Let me—" "I'm fine, maybe. Go back inside." "But you're bleeding." "I said go." Belinda went, because Zinda's voice, even at its softest, carried a gravity that made people listen, the same gravity the rest of the building had spent 11 years pretending wasn't there. Zinda cleaned it herself, on her knees, picking blasts out of wine, out of her own blood with bare hands, while 40 people ate lunch around her like she was a stain removing itself. Johnson straightened his jacket and looked down at her, at the top of her head, at the red soaking through her uniform, and said, loud enough for every table, every ear, every silent, complicit mouth in the room, "This is why you'll never be more than what you are." Zinda's hands stopped moving. They didn't stop because the words hurt. Words had stopped hurting years ago. They stopped because something behind her ribs, something ancient, something she had spent 3 decades pressing flat and folding small and locking in a room without windows, shifted, just slightly, like a door that had been sealed so long everyone forgot there was a fire behind it. Her hands trembled, not from the cut, from the effort of keeping that door closed. In the corner booth, Glory Matzinger set down her sparkling water and watched Zinda's shaking hands the way a person watches a crack spread across a windshield, knowing it's going to break, knowing she could stop it, and choosing instead to simply wonder when.
14 miles across the city, a black SUV moved through traffic like a blade through still water, unhurried, deliberate, and given room by everything around it. Richard sat in the passenger seat, reviewing the evening's details from a leather folio he kept organized the way surgeons keep instruments. The Calabrese family confirmed 3 representatives, neutral ground, the restaurant, reservations under a shell name, private dining room, rear of the building, 8 p.m., security sweep at 6, our men on the exits by 7. He turned a page. They're bringing their underboss, which means they're serious. This could settle the territory issue by... Richard. Yeah, boss? Stop talking. Richard stopped talking. He'd worked for Albert for 9 years. He knew the difference between the silence that meant, "I'm thinking," and the silence that meant, "I'm somewhere you can't follow." This was the second kind. Albert sat in the back seat the way he always sat, still, centered, taking up exactly as much space as he intended, and not a breath more. His suit was charcoal, his shoes were handmade, his watch cost more than most people's houses. Everything about him communicated a single message: I am not a man things happen to. I am the man who decides what happens. But his hands told a different story. His hands were holding a photograph so old the edges had gone soft as cloth. A young black woman in a floral dress, yellow flowers on blue cotton, the kind of dress you buy because it's on sale and wear because it makes you feel like the sun came out, holding a small boy on her hip. The boy's arms were wrapped around her neck, both of them smiling, not posing, smiling, the kind you can't fake, the kind that only happens when a body feels safe enough to forget it has a face. Albert was 8 years old in that photograph. 3 weeks before it was taken, he'd been sleeping behind a dumpster off Greenwood Avenue with a dead woman's coat pulled over his legs. His parents gone.
Not the kind of gone that comes with a funeral and flowers, the kind that comes with yellow tape and a story on the local news that nobody remembers by Thursday. He ate from garbage. He learned to sleep with his eyes half open. He forgot what it felt like to be warm. And then one night, February, cold enough to kill, a woman found him curled behind her building, shaking so hard his teeth had cut the inside of his mouth. She didn't call the police. She didn't step over him. She didn't pretend the dark was empty. She knelt down. She looked at him with eyes that didn't ask what he'd done, or where he came from, or whether helping him was safe. She said 4 words, "You're safe now, baby." She brought him inside. She fed him rice and beans from a pot that was only big enough for 1, but somehow always stretched to 2. She gave him her own son's old clothes. She let him sleep in a real bed with a real blanket, and she sat in a chair by the door until he stopped shaking. She kept him for 5 years. 5 years of packed lunches and homework at the kitchen table, and a voice that said, "I'm proud of you," like it was the easiest sentence in the language. Then the system found out. Then the system took him, and the streets that had almost killed him the first time finished the job of turning him into something else entirely. He never forgot her. Not her hands, not her voice, not the way she said his name like it mattered. 15 years he'd been searching, 15 years of dead ends and wrong addresses and names that didn't match anymore. Then, 6 days ago, one of his men ran a face through a database and matched it to an employment record at an upscale restaurant across town. Richard looked up from the photograph. His eyes met Richard's in the rearview mirror. "I don't care about the meeting tonight, Richard. I don't care about the Calabrese family. I don't care about territory." He paused. His thumb moved once across the woman's face in the photograph, a gesture so gentle it looked like it belonged to a completely different man. "I'm here for her." Richard didn't ask who. He didn't ask why. He'd seen Albert stare down men who wanted him dead without blinking. He'd never, not once, seen him hold anything like he held that photograph. Whatever was waiting at that restaurant tonight, Richard understood one thing clearly: God help anyone who got in the way. Now, if your heart is already pounding, I need you to pause for 2 seconds. Share this video. Send it to one person, your mother, your best friend, someone who's ever been treated like they were invisible. Because what's about to happen in this restaurant is going to change the way you think about power for the rest of your life. If you haven't subscribed yet, this is your sign. We're not even at the part that's going to wreck you.
At 7 p.m., the restaurant became a lie. Fresh flowers appeared on every table, white lilies, the kind you buy when you want a room to smell like money and taste. New tablecloths replaced the old ones, though the old ones were already clean because Zinda had pressed them that morning. Candles were lit. Glassware was switched from the everyday crystal to the crystal that lived in a locked cabinet and only came out when the restaurant needed to pretend it was something more than what it was. Johnson moved through the dining room like a man trying to outrun his own heartbeat, straightening forks that were already straight, adjusting chairs that didn't need adjusting, barking orders in a voice pitched 1 octave higher than usual, because fear does that to men who confuse authority with volume. He found Zinda restocking napkins near the service corridor and grabbed her arm, not hard enough to bruise, just hard enough to make sure she understood that he could. "Stay in the back tonight, storage room. I don't want you anywhere near the dining floor." He looked at her stained uniform. The wine had dried brown, the color of something old and ruined. "You're an embarrassment." He walked away before she could respond. Not that he expected a response. Walls don't talk back. Zinda went to the storage room. It was the size of a generous closet, shelving on 3 sides, a single bulb overhead, and the smell of industrial cleaner so thick you could taste it on your teeth. She sat on an upturned crate, the same kind of crate she and Teresa had shared coffee on that morning, back when the day still had the possibility of being ordinary. Teresa found her there 10 minutes later. She didn't say anything at first. She just took Zinda's hand, the one with the cut, now wrapped in a paper towel held on with rubber bands because no one had offered her a bandage, and squeezed. "I'm sorry, Zinda." "Nothing to be sorry for, T. Same song, different verse." She opened her mouth, closed it, and left, because sometimes love looks like staying, and sometimes it looks like walking away before you say the thing that makes someone's carefully built composure finally crack. At 7:38, 3 black SUVs pulled to the front entrance in a formation that didn't look accidental. Richard came through the door first. He didn't look like a guest. He looked like a man who had memorized every exit before he crossed the threshold. His eyes moved from corner to corner, the way a camera pans, smooth, systematic, missing nothing. He nodded once to someone outside. Then Albert walked in. He didn't announce himself. He didn't need to. The room announced him. Conversations dropped to whispers, spines straightened. The temperature didn't actually change, but every person in that dining room would later swear it did. Johnson nearly ran to greet him. His foot caught the edge of a chair and he stumbled, just slightly, just enough, before recovering with a smile so desperate it looked like it hurt to wear. Marie squared her shoulders. Sandra arranged her face into something welcoming and held it there with the effort of a woman gripping a ledge. Everyone performed. Everyone became their best possible version of themselves, the version that only existed when someone important was watching. Albert sat. He unbuttoned his jacket. He surveyed the room, slowly, face by face, the way a man reads a page when he's looking for one specific word. She wasn't here. But something else was. He could feel it, the way animals feel weather before it arrives, a wrongness, the particular electricity of a place where someone was being kept small. He recognized it instantly, the tightness in the staff's movements, the way the busboy flinched when Johnson passed, the way Marie's smile was a mask nailed on over something ugly. Albert had grown up inside that energy. He knew its architecture. Somewhere in this building, someone was invisible, and everyone else had agreed to keep them that way. He caught Richard's eye and said only 5 words. "Find her. She's here somewhere." In the storage room, 26 steps from Albert's chair, Zinda sat beneath a bare bulb with her hands folded in her lap, one wrapped in paper towels, both still trembling, and had no idea that the boy she'd lost was close enough to hear her breathe. It happened the way all inevitable things happen, dressed as an accident. Belinda came through the kitchen doors carrying 4 plates she had no business carrying. Johnson had sent 2 servers home early to cut costs before the evening's expense report, which meant the remaining staff were stretched to tearing, which meant a 23-year-old cleaning girl was doing a job no one had trained her for because someone had to and no one else would. Her left foot caught the threshold. The plates left her hands the way birds leave a wire, all at once, without warning, committed to gravity. The sound was enormous, porcelain on marble, 4 plates becoming 40 pieces, becoming 100. Every head in the dining room turned. The silence that followed lasted exactly 2 seconds, long enough for the entire room to assign blame before anyone spoke. Johnson's face went the color of something spoiled. He didn't look at Belinda. He didn't move toward the mess.
He turned his body toward the kitchen and unleashed a voice that was designed to do one thing, to summon and to shame in the same breath. "Zinda, get out here, now!" The kitchen doors opened. She came through them the way she came through every door in this building, quietly, with her eyes already lowered, with her body already arranged into the shape of apology. She carried a rag in one hand and nothing in the other. Her stained uniform, still marked with the wine from lunch, still carrying the afternoon's humiliation in its fibers, moved through the candlelit dining room like a wound walking through a painting. She didn't look up. She didn't scan the tables. She didn't see the man sitting 8 feet away, whose hands had gone completely still. She knelt, right there, on the marble, near the edge of Albert's table, and she began picking up broken pieces of porcelain with her bare hands, the same hands that were already cut, already wrapped in paper towels held together with rubber bands, already carrying today's blood beneath the bandage. Johnson stood over her, not beside her, over her. The geometry mattered. "Careful, Zinda. That china is worth more than you make in a month." Marie pressed her fingers to her lips. The laugh leaked through anyway, a small muffled thing, but audible enough. Nicholas, 3 tables away, swirled his 4th bourbon and said the word like he was brushing lint from his sleeve. Pathetic. The paper towel shifted, the cut reopened, a thin line of blood, dark, patient, unhurried, traced down Zinda's palm, across her wrist, and fell onto the white marble floor. A single drop, then another, red on white, the same colors of the wine from this afternoon, but heavier now, heavier because it was hers, and because no one in this room considered that a reason to stop. Albert's fork was halfway to his mouth. He lowered it, not quickly, the way a man sets something down when he's realized the world has just become a different place than it was 3 seconds ago. He stared at the woman on the floor, the apron, the worn shoes, cracked leather, soft at the sole, the way her eyes stayed down, trained there, disciplined into absence. He knew that posture. He knew what it cost to build it. He had built the same one himself once, in alleys and group homes and rooms where being seen meant being hit. But it was her hands that stopped his heart. He recognized them before he recognized her face, the shape of them, the way the fingers moved, careful, deliberate, familiar. He had watched those hands stir rice in a dented pot, watched them fold a blanket around his shoulders, watched them wipe tears off his face with a tenderness so total it was the first time he'd understood that gentleness and strength were the same thing. His breathing changed. Richard, standing near the wall, saw Albert's expression shift, saw something behind those eyes unlock, and instinctively slid his hand inside his jacket. Albert pushed back from the table and stood. Every man Richard had posted at every exit in the building straightened at once, like a current had passed through a single wire, connecting all of them. And Zinda, still on her knees, still bleeding, still invisible to every person in the room who had decided she didn't count, had no idea that the boy she'd wrapped in a blanket 30 years ago was standing directly above her, looking down at her hands, trying to remember how to breathe. Albert stepped away from the table, and the room began to misunderstand what was happening. Johnson moved to intercept, already assembling the apology, already constructing the sentence the way he constructed every sentence aimed upward, with deference lacquered over panic. "Sir, I deeply apologize for the disruption. We'll have this cleaned up immediately. I assure you this is not representative of—" Albert walked through him, not past him, through him, the way light passes through glass, without resistance, without acknowledgement, without any evidence that the object in its path was solid enough to matter. Johnson's mouth stayed open. The words kept forming, but the audience for them was already gone. Albert stopped directly in front of Zinda. She was still on her knees, still holding a shard of broken porcelain in her bleeding hand, still looking down at the marble floor, because looking down was the only direction this building had ever allowed her. And then the most dangerous man in the city did something that no one in that room, not Johnson, not Marie, not the armed men at every exit, had ever seen a man like him do. He knelt, slowly, deliberately, one knee lowering onto the marble, pressing into spilled wine that soaked into fabric worth more than every paycheck Zinda had earned that year combined. He didn't flinch. He didn't glance down. The suit meant nothing. It had always meant nothing. It was just the costume the world required him to wear, so it would take seriously a boy who once ate from garbage. He reached for her hand, gently, the way you reach for something sacred, something that might dissolve if you gripped too hard, and took the shard of porcelain from her palm. He set it on the floor beside them. Then he held her hand, blood and all. He didn't wipe it. He didn't wrap it. He pressed her open palm against his cheek and held it there, and his eyes closed for just a moment. And in that moment, he was not Albert, the name that made grown men leave cities. He was the boy in the photograph. He was 8 years old and shivering and being told for the first time in his life that he was safe. Zinda's breath caught. She looked up. Her eyes, which had spent 11 years trained on floors and baseboards and the shoes of people who would never look back, lifted and met his. The recognition didn't come all at once. It came the way dawn comes, slow, then all at once. "Albert?" Her voice broke on the second syllable, cracked clean in half, like something that had been held together too long and too carefully. "Mama Zinda." The sound that left her body was not a word. It was not a cry. It was something older than language, something that had been locked in her chest for 30 years, pressed flat and folded small, and sealed behind the same door that held everything else she'd taught herself not to feel. It came out now, all of it, at once. Her hands found his face, both hands, the bleeding one and the whole one. He held her the way he'd held him when he was small enough to carry. "My boy, my boy." He helped her stand. He took off his jacket and wrapped it around her shoulders, and she disappeared inside it, the way she used to disappear inside everything, except this time the disappearing felt like being found. Then Albert turned to face the room. The warmth left his body like a door slamming shut. What remained was something the temperature could feel. He buttoned his cuff, one slow, precise motion, and looked at Johnson, then Marie, then Sandra, then Nicholas, then Glory, one by one, the way a man reads a list he's already memorized. "I want to know something." The silence was so total you could hear the candle flames bend. Who was laughing? No one in that room breathed, and somewhere in the marrow of every person who had ever looked at Zinda and seen nothing, a very old, very dangerous certainty that cruelty toward the invisible has no consequences, quietly and permanently died.
Johnson spoke first, because Johnson always spoke first. It was the only move he knew, filling silence with words the way a man fills a hole he's falling into with his own hands. "Sir, if I could just explain, she was simply doing her job. We have protocols, and I would never—" "I didn't ask for an explanation." Albert's voice was level, flat. the kind of flat that a lake goes right before something surfaces. I asked who was laughing. Johnson's mouth closed. It would not open again for a long time. Richard stepped forward. He held a phone, screen facing outward, the way a lawyer holds an exhibit. On it, footage, the restaurant's own security cameras, time-stamped, every angle, every hour. Albert had owned access to this system for months. His men had installed a tap during a routine health inspection that Johnson never thought to question. Albert hadn't been watching Zinda. He hadn't known she was here. He'd been watching the restaurant for the Calabrese meeting, but the cameras didn't care about intention. They recorded everything: the wine, the laughter, the blood, the knees on marble, all of it, catalogued, preserved, waiting. Albert addressed them the way a surgeon addresses tissue, precisely, without tremor, cutting only where necessary. Johnson first. You've been skimming 14% off the beverage invoices for 3 years, rounding up on vendor costs, pocketing the difference. One phone call to Mr. Matzinger, and you don't just lose this job, you lose every reference you've ever had. You become unhirable. You become nothing. He let the word land. You know what that feels like now, don't you? Marie. 4:07 p.m., camera 2. You laughed when a man poured wine on a woman's face, not behind her back, to her face. It's on video. It will live forever. Your grandchildren could watch it. Sandra. You didn't laugh. You didn't pour. You didn't say a word. Albert tilted his head, a small, almost gentle motion that somehow made it worse. You moved her cart like it was contaminated. You wiped your hands after touching where she'd touched, and when she bled, you watched. Silence is not neutral, Sandra. Silence is a side. You chose yours. Nicholas. Albert didn't even look at him directly. He looked at Richard as if Nicholas wasn't worth the rotation. Mr. Ashford, you run money through this restaurant's accounts, has for years. Shell invoices, ghost vendors. I have every transaction. Now he looked at him. You called her pathetic. That word is going to cost you more than you can calculate tonight. Then Glory. Albert walked to her corner booth. She hadn't moved. Her sparkling water still sat half-finished, the bubbles long dead. You saw everything. His voice dropped, not louder, not harder, but heavier. Every day, for years, you saw it and you had the power to stop it, and you chose your comfort over her dignity. That's not cruelty. That's something worse. That's permission. Glory's hand trembled against her glass. She said nothing. There was nothing to say. Albert turned. He found Belinda, standing near the kitchen doors, shaking, tears running silent tracks down her face. He nodded at her, once, small. The nod meant, I know, I saw. You were the one who knelt with napkins when no one else moved. He found Teresa, standing just inside the kitchen window, both hands gripping the counter. Another nod. You were kind when kindness had no audience. That's the only kind that counts. Then he turned back to Johnson. He stepped close enough that Johnson could hear him breathe. You told her she'd never be more than what she is. Albert's jaw tightened. Let me tell you what she is. She is the woman who saved my life. She is the only reason I'm standing here. She is worth more than every person in this building, combined. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. And you made her bleed. He turned to Zinda. His face softened, cracked open just for her, just for a moment, the boy flickering behind the man, like a candle behind bulletproof glass. Say the word, Mama. Just say the word. The room waited. Every person who had ever made Zinda small now stood at the edge of something they couldn't take back, couldn't talk their way out of, couldn't smooth over with protocol or position. And the only person who could save them was the woman they spent 11 years agreeing didn't matter.
Zinda looked at Albert. Not at the suit, not at the men stationed at every door, not at the room full of people who had just discovered that the woman they'd treated like furniture was the foundation beneath the most powerful man they'd ever met. She looked at him. The way she used to look at him when he was small and furious and swinging at a world that had already decided he wasn't worth keeping. She looked past the jaw and the authority and the cold precision that had just dismantled 5 people without raising a single decibel. And she found him, the boy, still in there, still burning, still 8 years old and shivering behind a dumpster, convinced that the only language the world understood was violence, because violence was the only language the world had ever spoken to him. Albert. Her voice was steady, quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't come from weakness. It comes from a place so deep inside a person that nothing on the surface can reach it. I didn't take you off those streets so you could become the thing that put you there. The room shifted, not physically, molecularly. The air rearranged itself around her words, the way air rearranges around something that has always been true but never been said out loud. Albert's jaw tightened. They hurt you. People have been hurting me my whole life, baby. She said it without bitterness, without performance, the way you'd say water is wet or the sun comes up. Fact, lived fact, the kind that's been carried so long it's worn smooth. That's not new. She took his hand, the hand that could end careers, end livelihoods, end things far more permanent than either. She held it the way she'd held it 30 years ago, wrapped in both of hers, firm, warm, certain. What would be new is if the boy I raised showed this room something they've never seen before. She squeezed, a powerful man who chooses mercy. Albert stared at her. The war behind his eyes was visible, rage and love grappling in a space too small for both. For a long moment, the most dangerous man in the city looked exactly like an 8-year-old boy being told for the first time that there was another way. He exhaled. The breath left him like something he'd been carrying for 15 years. He turned to Johnson. She forgives you. A beat. Long enough to feel permanent. I don't. But she asked me to let you stand, so you get to stand. He turned back to Zinda, and his voice, the voice that had made this room feel like a coffin, went soft. Can we go home, Mama? Zinda reached behind her back and untied her apron. She folded it, carefully, precisely, the way she had done everything for 11 years, because doing things right was the one dignity no one had ever managed to take from her. She placed it on the counter. She turned to Belinda. The girl was trembling. Zinda touched her face. Stand tall, baby. Don't ever let them make you small. Zinda walked toward the door, Albert beside her. At the threshold, he paused. He didn't turn around, but his voice reached every corner of that room like smoke through a keyhole. She showed you grace. Don't confuse it for weakness. I'm watching. I will always be watching. They left. The restaurant was silent. The kind of silent that doesn't end when the noise starts again. Belinda looked down at the folded apron on the counter. She picked it up, held it. Then she looked at Johnson. For the first time, she didn't look down. And Johnson, for the first time in his life,
did. In the car, the city moved past the windows like a world reassembling itself. Zinda was quiet. Albert placed the old photograph on the dashboard, the woman in the floral dress, the boy on her hip, both smiling like the world hadn't learned how to hurt them yet. Zinda took it up. Her thumb traced the edge the same way his had that afternoon, gently, like it might dissolve. "You kept this." "It's the only picture where I'm smiling, Mama." She looked at him. She took his hand. "You're smiling now." He was. The car pulled into the night, and behind them, a restaurant full of people sat in the wreckage of a silence that would follow them home and into their beds and into the dark hours where the truth waits for people who've spent their whole lives outrunning it. The truth that the most powerful person in that building was never the man with the money or the name or the man at the doors. It was the woman with the mop. It had always been the woman with the mop. And she chose mercy, not because they deserved it, but because the boy she loved was watching, and she had one last thing to teach him. If this story is still sitting in your chest right now, if you're thinking about Zinda, about that photograph, about the boy who never stopped searching, then do me one thing. Don't just like this video. Share it. Put it in your story. Send it to someone who needs to be reminded that the people the world overlooks are usually the ones holding everything together. Drop a comment and rate this story from 0 to 10. And if you haven't subscribed yet, you already know you belong here. I'll see you in the next one.